steps up. Ricketts is at the high point. Jones. Aromaterio has a lane. Nicholas Aromaterio, the shot. Scores! Holy jumping! The Italian stallion puts the puck in the back of the net. Mamma mia, Nicholas Aromaterio! So to keep it in and does. Callum Jones for Potts. At the blue line, kept in by the skate of Thomas Maya. Maya. Down low on the half course, he swings out in the slot for Potts. Kyle Potts has it, hands on, now he shoots, scores! Holy jumping! How do you do? Kyle Potts puts the puck in the back of the net. He's blocked that shot, and coming the other way is Alton McDermott. He's in on the breakaway, scores! Holy jumping! His grandfather, Paul Henderson, must be ecstatic about that one because Alton McDermott just scored his first career Buckland Cup final playoff goal. Has been pulled. The Dukes are in the Oakville zone. Zone salvage. Swung that around. The Blades are trying to tie this puck up. It goes into the corner. The Blades have a chance to get this out. Lions will tie it up. 10 seconds. Gilmore has it at the point. It's in. Tips. Just wide. 7 seconds. It's back in the corner. Ewing's back in. 3, 2, 1. The Oakville Blades are champion. Holy jumping. Blades win. Blades win. Blades win. The Oakville Blades are Buckland Cup champions.
You're watching Mamma Mia! This is Fire Talk with Nicholas Fiore. Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 26 of Mamma Mia! This is Fire Talk. I'm Nicholas Fiore, the broadcast voice of the Oakville Blades in the Ontario Junior Hockey League. And joining me on this edition of the show, I have a very special guest, Dave Poulin, 13 years in the NHL, former player, and currently a hockey analyst on TSN. Dave, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure, Nicholas. It's good to talk hockey, and maybe we'll be talking about hockey that we can actually go watch in the near future.
And we all hope that's the case, right? That's the plan, and we want to get back going, of course, sooner rather than later. And we're going to get to, obviously, the stuff that the NHL has said couple days now in accordance to the return to play. So hopefully that gets going. But first, I want to talk, hockey with you. I want to talk about yourself because you always talk about everyone on TSN and every player and every team. But it's a chance where I get to, talk to you and bring up your career a little bit. Obviously, 13 years. That's a long time in the NHL, right? And obviously a pretty good career. You started in the OPJHL though with Dixie. So I guess similarity to the Oakville Blades and the OJHL, just the rebranding. But then you went to Notre Dame in the 78 to 82 season. But then also the captain of Notre Dame in the last season. And then obviously trying to find your way in the NHL. Undrafted, of course, went to Sweden, and then Philly picked you up. 1 year in Philly, and then you're the captain as well. Just because you've been the captain of a couple teams, let's go there first. What does a captain role truly entail if people don't know already? And how honored were you to not just only be the captain of your school, but also of your first NHL team?
Well, the route was an unusual one right from the start, Nicholas. I mean, I grew up literally, a mile from the Oakville border in the west end of Mississauga and played house league early. And then, as you said, I actually played some games with the Junior B, at that point, Dixie Ventures. So I have played against Oakville when they were a Junior B team way back when. And that was on the way to getting called up to play for the Dixie Beehives, which were in the Junior A League at that point. But, starting at Notre Dame and all the way up, usually the captain when you're playing minor hockey is the best player. And that's usually the way it works, right? The best player gets to be the captain, and that's the way it is. And you don't really know what goes on that, but when you're 12 years old and you're playing the other team, you're looking to see who's wearing the captain or the letters because they're usually the best players. And, I think as you get older, while that may continue, other things emerge. And I took a great deal of pride in it. I was actually a 2-year captain at Notre Dame and took a tremendous amount of pride in it. And different teams handle it in different ways. Some teams, even at the NHL level to this day, Nicholas, some teams vote on the captain as a player group. Some teams just name a captain that the coach or general manager, feels is the way to go. And so if we start off, wearing the C for the Flyers, it was a tremendous pride and a tremendous shock to me. I was only in my second full year in the league, and Bobby Clarke had been my absolute mentor and confidant through my first year plus in the league, my roommate. I worked out in the summers with him. So when he retired to become the vice president general manager, we had a new coach coming in, and Mike Keenan, who'd never coached in the NHL. And we had some real good veterans on that hockey club. And there was always the early speculation before the year started was that Daryl Sittler was going to be named captain. And, for the Leaf fans who, followed Sittler's great career in Toronto, he got traded to Philadelphia the year before that. And he was set to take over from Clarke. And we were at a luncheon downtown, and preseason luncheon. And Sittler was to be named captain, we understood. And then that didn't happen at the luncheon. We got back to the practice rink. We all dispersed. Sittler was called in and told he was being traded to the Detroit Red Wings.
Wow.
And about 2 hours later, I was called back to the practice rink by Mike Keenan and Bob Clarke, who informed me that I would be the captain of the Flyers. And it was overwhelming, quite frankly, like really overwhelming. And we had some great guys in that locker room. Mark Howe was a Hall of Famer and a great player, and leadership guys. Brad Marsh at a young age had already been the captain of the Calgary Flames. Guys like Brad McCrimmon, the dear departed, who was a great, great leader. And sort of out of nowhere, I was named captain, and I wasn't the best player, but I took a great deal of pride in it. I had a lot of really good leaders around me to help shape the way. And that's when I really, when I've given an opinion about really young players being named captain, I had 4 years of college and a year in Europe and a year in the NHL at that point. It wasn't like my second year in the league at 19 years old. And I've had a pretty strong opinion about not naming, 19 and 20-year-old captains. And it's to do with all of the off-ice things that I think a captain should be involved with. And I don't want to put that pressure on a young player. And if a young player is a star player and he's the leading scorer in the team, he has to deal with a lot of things wearing the C that you might not think about. Off-ice stuff. He might be dealing with a personal situation of a veteran player on the team that's family oriented. He might be dealing with battles between players and coaches, between players and management, where he has to insert himself. And Mike Keenan, for one, used the captaincy to his advantage. Like, he really came after me hard. And his goal was to make the players form their bond around me. And so when we had our battles, the lines were drawn. And I always looked at myself as a liaison between the captain or the players and the coach, but that was going to speak out for the players. So I think the role has a lot of different meanings depending on the level you play at. I took a great deal of pride in it. I actually have a hockey card. It's one of my favorite hockey cards from my career, with all the talk about card collecting right now becoming, a new hobby again, and the sale of the Gretzky card for over $1 million. I have a unique card from Boston, and it's during the playoffs in 1992, and we're playing Montreal, and you can see a Montreal player's glove in the shot. But the reason it's a special card for me is I have the C on in Boston.
Wow.
And Ray Bourque was the longtime captain of the Bruins, obviously, and he was hurt during the playoffs. And they made a decision for the only time ever in his entire career to put the C on someone else.
Wow.
And someone shot a hockey card of it. So it's a pretty cool hockey card for me to have. And, and I wore a letter in Washington as well in my brief time in 2 years in Washington. So a great deal of pride in that. And I think there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it.
Was it also, which that's an amazing story as well, but was it also more pride in it as well because you were undrafted and no one drafted you, but you had to find your way to the NHL, to Philadelphia, through Europe, through Sweden, which you see a lot of people do. But that undrafted process probably led you to saying, okay, like, I think I do kind of deserve this, even though I was honored and even though you didn't really maybe think you were going to get it, but you deserved it. And talk about also that undrafted process on how it led you to the NHL.
Yeah, I really had no thoughts of playing in the National Hockey League. And, and I say that I was a hockey fan growing up, and I was a big Leaf fan growing up. And my favorite player was actually Bobby Orr. And I had a chance to meet him and develop a friendship with him, post that, which was pretty cool. The first time I met him in person was after being traded to Boston. And it was my first game, and I had parked my rental car in the old Boston Garden in the back, and I was getting out of the car, and he walked over towards the car, and I'm thinking to myself, this is Bobby Orr. Like, Bobby Orr is walking towards me right now. And he said, "Hey, Dave, great to have you on board." And I was stunned that he knew my name, but that was Bobby. I mean, Bobby had somebody good working for him that said, "Hey, somebody just got traded here from Philadelphia, and he may be at the rink tonight." But growing up, as a Leaf fan and a hockey fan, I never saw myself playing in the NHL. I just didn't. I was really, really small growing up, a typical story of a late bloomer physically. Got an opportunity to go to Notre Dame, continued to grow there physically. And then coming out of Notre Dame, Nicholas, I was going to work. I had a great job in international sales, and I was all set to go to work. And it wasn't until June after my graduation that I got a call about going to Europe. And I talked to the company that had hired me in international sales, said, "Hey, I have a chance to play hockey in Europe for a year." And they said, "Great. That'll even, enhance your international experience more." And so that's all I was doing by going to Europe was, I just thought, well, I'll go to Sweden, I'll play hockey for a year, I'll come back and start my life. And, the weird twists and turns of life, I get, picked up by the Flyers. They send me the American Hockey League. I played 16 games in the American Hockey League, all in the same calendar year. Wow. And then called up to play my first game in Maple Leaf Gardens and my call up, Nicholas, came on April Fool's Day. So if you're sitting in the minor leagues on April Fool's Day, and the phone rings in Duffy's Pancake House, and Duffy says, "Hey, Dave, it's for you. It's Keith Allen," who was the general manager of the Flyers. And I'm like, "Okay, sure, it's Keith Allen," And he said, you're gonna play tonight in New Haven with Maine, but then you're gonna fly to Toronto tomorrow morning on April 2nd and play your first game for the Philadelphia Flyers. So it was such a whirlwind. But from the drafting standpoint, it's kind of crazy because once you make it, it's an irrelevant point. The other player coming in that year was the 4th overall pick in the draft, Ronnie Sutter. We were rookies the same year. And once you start to play, you start to play. It doesn't matter anymore. And it wasn't like I held a grudge or anything. I was caught a little bit too. If you look at the drafts of 78, 79, 80, it was when the WHA was merging with the NHL, and the draft age dropped from 20 to 18. So the draft went from 12 rounds to 6 rounds.
Wow.
And then they combined essentially 3 draft years into 1.
Wow.
So if you look at some of the players through that stretch that weren't drafted, there was only 6 rounds of the draft. So my tremendous right winger, Tim Kerr in Philadelphia, was never drafted. Same type of thing. And the smart teams right after those drafts, because there was such a surplus of players, can you imagine right now, and we've got so much going on with COVID, if they eliminated 2 draft years and instead of having a 7-round draft, had a 4-round draft and combined 3 draft years worth of players into 1. So you would combine every, if we just think off the top of our heads, every McDavid, Eichel, Matthews, Marner, all into 1 draft.
Yeah.
For 3 years, if you look at over a 3-year period. And essentially that's what happened. And you are also absorbing the players who had already played in the WHA in that age group. So Mark Messier had played as a 17-year-old WHA. He was a draft pick. Kenny Linsman, Mike Gartner, all those great young guys that had gone down to Birmingham as 17-year-olds were draft picks. So I wasn't drafted. I never should have been drafted at that point, but there were extenuating circumstances to the draft.
That's actually crazy to think about. And yeah, putting those draft classes all together, just imagine the pandemonium, never mind what would happen, right? That's insane. Obviously being traded though, Dave, it's not fun. I don't think really depends unless you're going from a bottom tier team to a top tier team, which you see sometimes happening in the world of sports.
I lost you for a split second. Yeah. I lost you for a split second.
There we go.
Back now, Nicholas.
Good. It's tough, as I said, from going, being traded overall, right? In any league, it's tough. But going from a bottom tier team to, to a top tier team sometimes works out well. But for yourself, you went from Philly to Boston, 7 years in Philadelphia, and then, 90 to 93 with Boston, and then ending 93, 95, which, by the way, you ended your NHL career playing when I was born. In 1995, which is absolutely insane to me.
You must be a really young guy, Nicholas. You're a really young guy.
Oh man, I have turned 25, but I mean, I'm like, wait, he ended his career when I was born. That's crazy to me. But what's it like being traded? I mean, 724 games, regular season in the league in the NHL over 13 years, 530 points, which is good, racking up 73 playoff points as well. So 843 games overall between playoffs and NHL and regular season, I should say. But, how is it like being traded from, a few different teams, and what's that process like overall?
Yeah, I was only traded once. I signed as a free agent with Washington, but the trade was unique in itself. The Flyers, we had a really good run with the Flyers, and really 3 totally different teams. And Bobby Clarke, as I mentioned earlier, was my closest friend, and we had maintained quite a close relationship even as player and general manager. And so it was a 1-game road trip to Pittsburgh on a Monday. And I had the same roommate for probably 5+ years at that point, and that was Rick Tocchet. And it was 3:00 on a Monday afternoon. We were playing the following night in Pittsburgh, Tuesday night. And the phone rang, and it was game day actually, and the phone rang, and Talk picked it up and got a funny look on his face and handed it to me, and it was Clarky, who had not made the trip. And Clarky just said, "Hey Davey, I just want to let you know I just traded you to the Boston Bruins." And when we had played together, he had told me, we were playing golf one day and we were talking about being traded, and he had said if a player asks who he got traded for, then he doesn't really care that he got traded, he just wants to know his value. And so I remembered that clearly. So I didn't even ask him who I got traded for. And I said, okay. And he said, well, here's Harry Sinnon's number. You've got to call him. And I said, no, I don't really have to call him, Bob, but thanks. I appreciate it. And I hung up. And so Doc had said, what's going on? I said, I just got traded. He said, no way. Who'd you get traded for? I said, I don't know. I didn't ask. So that became the theme of the whole thing. Is even when I went downstairs to meet our traveling secretary and get a plane ticket, he said, is there anybody else going? I said, I have no idea. I have no idea if it's a multiplayer trade. I have no idea what's going on.
Wow.
And all I know is I got traded. And at the time, Nicholas, I had spent the previous 5+ years working in the summers. And my first agent, after 2 years in the NHL, said to me, you're going to MBA school, law school, or you're going to work. And I said, I'm the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers. We just went to the Stanley Cup Finals. I've got a job. And he said, yeah, and the average career in the NHL is 4.2 years. You're halfway done. At which point I had to say, you do work for me, right? And so I did go to work in the summers, and I went to work with a big firm on Wall Street and got all my licenses, and then spun off and opened a little broker dealer. So, I had a life going in the summertime, and just did it in the summer, didn't do it during the regular year. So I really had to make a decision at that point. It was January, and I just said, I'm going to sit back and see what happens, and talk to Boston and see what they're thinking, and sort of put myself in a position where I could make a choice. And, when I was traded, there were no rumors. This wasn't like, it wasn't a rumor mill at all. This was right out of the blue. And, the longtime captain and about 3 weeks before that, Paul Holmgren was the head coach, and they decided to make a change in captaincy. So that should have been an indicator to me, that he just said, look, we're going young, we're going to do this, do that. And I said, hey, do whatever you want to do. And so they had taken the captaincy away about 3 weeks prior, but still, it didn't clue into me that it was because they were going to trade me. And I don't know that it was. And I don't even know that I was shopped anywhere. I've never heard that from anybody else. Clarky just made a decision he was going to trade me, and it was a 1-for-1 deal for Kenny Linsman. And, I was going to the best team in the NHL, in the Boston Bruins.
There you go. And, with that being said, you have some achievements as well within the NHL. I mean, well, NCAA first, second all-star team, obviously, in the 81, 82. Then moving to the NHL, you played in a couple of all-star games, if I'm not mistaken, 85, 86 season, 87, 88. But I would say personally, probably for me, is a couple more important honors, if I'm allowed to say it, in the 1986 season and 87 as well. NHL Top Defensive Forward, the Frank J. Selke Trophy, and then the NHL Leadership Humanitarian Award, the King Clancy Trophy. That was big too in 92, 93. And then you were also inducted in the Flyers Hall of Fame in 2004, which I would think is a tremendous and a huge deal. With that being said, with all of the achievements you've garnished in your NHL career, what's your overall, words or expressions and feeling your time in the NHL overall over the 13 years?
I'm really blessed by the game of hockey. And, I played a game I loved, and it was incredibly good to me. And it's woven in and out of my life the whole way through, no matter what I've done. Sports and hockey has been a part of it, whether direct or indirect. And, I've really, really been fortunate to play a great game. And as much because of the people I've met along the way, the relationships I've made, the friendships I have, because that's what it's about. People ask me if I'm a Flyers fan or a Bruins fan or I'm a Washington fan. I'm a fan of the guys I
or a Leafs fan.
I follow, or a Leafs fan. I'm a fan of the guys that I know that I have relationships with. I'm a big fan of Rick Tocchet's in Arizona. I'm a big fan of Craig Berube, one of my closest friends in St. Louis. And that's what you end up following is you follow your buddies, and you are blessed with great friendships. But the game's been so good to me, and it was good to me in an unexpected way, and that I never expected to play at the highest level. If I'd have finished my career, after Notre Dame, it would have still been a great game that enabled me to get a great education at a terrific university. And, I enjoyed my 4 years at Notre Dame immensely. I went back there. I coached there for 10 years, worked in athletics director for a couple of years. Two of my 3 daughters have graduated from Notre Dame, their undergrad degrees. And, so it's just been each step of the way, hockey's been a big part of the fabric. And it's, I think it's the greatest game. And I think it's the greatest game because of the team aspect of it. It's not an individual sport. I remember having Stevie Eiserman in to talk to my team when I was at Notre Dame, and he was just winding his career up as a great player in Detroit. And he came in before the game, and he said to the guys, and he was talking in such a quiet voice, I could see all my players leaning in to listen. He said, if you want to play an individual sport, go play tennis or golf. Don't play hockey. Wow. And my guys' eyes were just wide open. It was like, here was this future Hall of Famer telling them that if they were going to be selfish, that hockey wasn't the game they should play. And it's a pretty good lesson for all of us. But I think through it, if you're going to ask me one thing, and, when I talk to kids, for whatever reason, Nicholas, I had the ability to keep going in whatever I did, whatever I was involved in, whatever I was doing. Absolutely. I met roadblocks. I met, stumbles. There were bad days. There were great days. But if I had a talent, it was the ability to keep going. It wasn't, a specific hockey skill or anything like that. It was that I could just keep going. And that's the lesson, that translates across every part of the world and we've had to learn it far too hard in the last 8 or 9 months because we've had to keep going. It's been really tough for a lot of people through this entire pandemic. And we're sitting here and, when we are in mid-December because we've kept going and we will keep going.
I think Jaromir Jagr might have taken that advice from you because he's not stopping anytime soon. It looks like he just keeps on going.
He certainly does.
That's for sure. Obviously, finally, just to wrap up kind of like the playing aspect for yourself, was it simply, that's it, 1995, it was time to retire, time to move on, whether it was no staff experience after that, just enjoy the life after? Was it, okay, 1995, this is my last season with the Capitals and I'm done?
No, it wasn't like that at all. The 94-95 season, it was the lockout year. And so we didn't play through the first half of that year. The first game was late January. It could end up looking very much like this upcoming season for the NHL. And Washington had approached me about playing another year. And simultaneous to that, I got a call just an out of the blue call, Nicholas, on a Sunday afternoon. I was watching NFL playoff games. It was maybe early January. And I was sitting with my buddy, and we were watching the NFL playoffs, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was an acquaintance from Notre Dame, not anybody that worked there, but just acquaintance through the university. And they said, look, they're thinking of making a change in the head coach position. Would you be interested in coming back and coaching? And I had not thought of coaching at any level. It didn't interest me. I had not thought about it. I wasn't going to coach. I wasn't going to stay in hockey. I was, I'd carved a career outside of it, and that's what I was doing. And I hung up the phone, and I remember saying to my buddy, and I just got a really weird phone call, like right out of the blue. And that put me on a track. Notre Dame is a unique place, Nicholas. It's a really small school. There's only 8,000 students there, and everybody knows everybody. There's only 2,000 kids in each class, and people stay in close touch with the university, and they have a way of doing things. And within, I don't know, within maybe 4 or 5 days, and we hadn't started playing again, they had sent a plane out to get my wife and I. They flew us out. They had a builder. They had schools for the kids picked. They had everything all lined up. And I remember, in talking about it from a family decision, it was really a decision to go back and raise. I have 3 beautiful daughters, and it was a chance to go back. At that point, I've got identical twins, and they were 9, and my youngest was 5. And it was a chance to go back to a really, really good environment to raise them in, that didn't involve anywhere near the travel that the NHL would, or any of the the other things that would be involved. So it was a lifestyle decision, and I went back, and they were basically raised on the campus for the next 12 plus years, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
And obviously you had a pretty storied NHL playing career in 13 years, but even longer as a staff member in the game of hockey, 19 years, 95 to 05 with Notre Dame, of course, NCAA as the head coach. Then 05-06, you took a bit of a break. Then 07-08, also a break. But between that, you were a scout for 2 years with the Anaheim Ducks back in the NHL, of course, in 06-07, 08-09. Moving on then to 2009 to 2014, you came back home, I guess you could say, essentially, obviously from Timmins, but to the Toronto Maple Leafs, VP, Vice President of Hockey Operations, 5 years there in the NHL. And then the final 2 years, 2012 to 2014, was the Toronto Marlies in the AHL as general manager. First, we're going to touch upon, if it's okay with you, the why the little break? Because you had the Notre Dame. Was it just the change of maybe of your living aspect on Notre Dame for 10 years, and then a bit of a break, then the Ducks, then a little break, and then okay, let's push through full throttle again?
Yeah, no, I did things throughout that. So I stayed for Notre Dame for 2 more years as an athletics director, an administrative athletics director, to help build the new rink. And that was the goal of the facility. So it was actually 12 straight years there. And while I was doing that, my last 2 years, I had more time on my hands. I worked in the development office, essentially raising funds for Notre Dame. And that's when I chose to go back to work with Anaheim. So I actually have a Stanley Cup ring from 2007. And then 2007 to 2009, I did step away totally. And I went into private industry in the Chicagoland area. And I always wanted to do something totally outside of the game. And so I got involved in a business, was there for 2 years, a very unique business, and things were going really, really well. And, I was a managing director and partner, and it was a really interesting experience, and enjoyed it in the real world, as you would put it. And that's when Brian Burke got the general manager's job in Toronto in late 2008 and coming into 2009. And Brian had been my first agent. Brian was my agent for 5 years. Wow. Early in his career. And so I called him and I said, look, I want to be involved. I want to get involved. And, you're back in Toronto and I want to be involved. And so we met and we sort of figured it out. And so I was the vice president of hockey ops for 5 full years, from 2009 to 2014, and then picked up the Marlies in 2011, partway through 2010. And I really enjoyed my American Hockey League overlap with the NHL. And we had some really good teams. My last 3 years with the Marlies, we played in 9 playoff series, and we lost to John Cooper's Norfolk team, which is, the Tyler Johnson, Andre Palat, Richard Panik, essentially the young Tampa Bay Lightning Stanley Cup champion team.
Yeah.
And then we lost to Texas as well in 2014 in the conference final. So we had some real good runs, and some real good players went through that. Morgan Riley, Nazem Kadri, Jake Gardner. We had a bunch of guys go through that, through that team at that time, and enjoyed it immensely. And then when Brendan Shanahan came in and was going to make wholesale changes, that's when we were all fired in the summer of 2014. And Claude Loiselle and I essentially in July of 2014. And I had some opportunities right away to get back in. And I thought I would just sit back and sort of evaluate the landscape. And that's when actually both TV networks approached me about getting involved in some capacity. I had no idea that I wanted to do TV. I had I hadn't thought about it at all. I guess similar to when I said I went into coaching, I just hadn't thought it was going to be on the path. And I thought I'd try it for a little while, and started in 2014 on the TH2N show, the late night show at TSN. That's Hockey Tonight with Glenn Sheeler. And I really enjoyed it, and sort of built it out. And now it's to a point where what I like the best, Nicholas, is I work in 6 or 7 totally different silos. And I do the Leaf panels for all of our Leaf games with Jeff O'Neill and James Duthie, and we'll see who goes in for Bob McKenzie, who is retired, and once the Leaf games rack up. But I also do color on Montreal Canadian games for TSN. So I did 32 games last year, I believe, with Brian Mudrick. Mike Johnson and I share that role. And then you do the shows. You do Sports Center. You do Gino Retta's show, which I enjoy immensely. That's hockey. Yep. And then there's the radio aspect. So I'll do Leafs Lunch with Andy Petrillo. I'll sit in on Overdrive with Brian Hayes and those guys, and do radio shows around the country. I do regular radio show in Winnipeg. I'm on in Vancouver, in Ottawa, and Montreal. So, and they're all different, and they all take different levels of preparation, and I enjoy it. I really enjoy it. Being in color for 3 years now puts me back in the rinks, and you've got to prepare in a totally different manner than you do prepare for the panels when I do the Leaf games. So I really like the diversity of it.
You're doing everything that I want to do one day. Almost everything. I know it's the different network that you're at, but my two that I look up to, other than, of course, my idol's Joe Bowen for play-by-play, of course, but like Tim and Sid over there, they're amazing. But yeah, everything that you're doing, other than you said play-by-play, that's exactly all I want to do. So, but I guess you got to start here, right? You got to start here.
Keep going.
And you got to work your way up, of course. I just want to touch upon just a little bit. We all know the Toronto market is very high pressure. It's crazy. The media, of course, just everything in general. Were you feeling any high pressure, high volume, no risk, no reward type of thing being with the Leafs and the Marlies?
No more so than I would put on myself, Nicholas. Not at all. I mean, if you look at the markets I played in Philadelphia and Boston, and you'd be hard pressed to find, in those 2 markets, those are pretty tough markets.
Yeah.
And, like everyone thinks that the market they're in is the hardest market to play in. Talk to people in Philadelphia or Boston. Those are pretty tough markets. But it's self-imposed pressure. The pressure that we put on ourselves in Toronto was to win, was to get better and to win. And that's what it was. And nothing from the outside, affected us in what we did any more than we put the pressure on ourselves. And it's an incredibly, incredibly intense job. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, there's no escaping it. And it's not the media, it's yourself. I mean, you want to get better. You want to improve. You constantly, you're waking up at 3 a.m. and you're trying to figure out how to get better and how to be successful. And so, of course, it's a tough market, and there are external pressures, but the internal pressure that we put on ourselves was every bit as demanding as anything that could be external.
What led you to say, okay, I'm done playing, I'm done being a staff member? Did you ever think, let's take a break and let's see what's next, or why go right into broadcasting right away? And what made you kind of maybe love it or like the broadcasting aspect?
Yeah, I really tiptoed into broadcasting. I didn't commit to going in fully, a go. I said, well, I'm going to try it and see if I like it. And the more I did it, the more I liked it. And it's like anything, people say, well, oh, you're so comfortable, you're so natural. There's nothing natural about it. You prepare, you do a ton of work. When the lights go on, you're going 100 miles an hour. It doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, but you do your homework and you get ready. And that's when you're comfortable is, to this day, I mean, you still feel the same thing. And, I hadn't been on air in about a month, I guess, because Gino Retta's show took a hiatus and, hockey was basically shut down. So you're doing radio stuff and you're doing podcasts and things like that, but you're not on air per se on live TV. And when you get cranked up again, you get those same feelings, the same emotions, and you want to be good at what you do. And you want to, but you work hard and you prepare so that when you sit down, you're hopeful that someone says, wow, you look really comfortable.
And that's exactly what I did. See, my lights are on. I did my homework, and I'm ready to talk to you. There we go. Right?
You got the picture up behind you. It's great.
Look at that. Hey, I always. That's one thing people said guest wise. I like my backgrounds. I know with the Oakville Blaze, I don't really have a backdrop. I got everything, so I like my backgrounds. You got to look as professional as possible, and do what you love. And this is what I wanted to do since I was very small, just being a play-by-play and being a broadcaster, and what I love. Which hopefully one day it happens, right? You just got to keep on grinding, keep on working. Let's talk about the game in itself, Dave. If you don't mind, the NHL, of course. What in your eyes is different from when you came into the league into how the game has grown and developed, basically, let's just say, going into now 2021?
Well, I think there's more skill from top to bottom. There were always great players, but I think when you look at the skill level of some of the individuals now, it's really, really staggering. I mean, to look at. But I mean, as much as it changes, it stays the same. I think if you would say there are more, I mean, probably more individual talent from top to bottom on a team, yet are the teams better? I mean, I think we were really good teams because we were made up of different elements and different guys brought different things to the table. And I really liked the game when I played it. And I think the best players could play in any generation. Wayne Gretzky would be the best in the game today as he was the best in the game when we played. And, and the very best will always be the very best. But I think in terms of from top to bottom, guys work on individual skills much more. And I don't, some of that's good and some of it's not. But, when I say that, it's a fun game for me to watch. I love the offensive side of it. Even though I was, more known as a defensive player. I mean, I love watching what individuals are capable of doing, in today's game. The skating from top to bottom is better for sure. And because once again, people work on it more, you have all the individual practices that go on and it just seems like from top to bottom, that there is more individual skill.
And I guess a natural follow-up would be, how has the league changed, just specifically, maybe not on ice, even off ice, the NHL in general, from then and to now?
Well, 21 teams most of my career, and now there'll be 32. So just in pure numbers, there are more teams. And back then, I've spoken lately about something that was really prevalent for me was the team rivalries that existed back then. You played 7 or 8 games within your division, then you had your playoff rounds within your division. So your first couple of rounds, you could play teams another 7 or 8, 7 times rather, to go with the 8 times during the regular season. So you might see a team 15 times. And that's what we could have right now, the way the divisions are aligning for this year. You're going to see, if this Canadian division goes as planned, you're going to play each team 9 times, and then you're going to play your first 2 playoff rounds within your division. So you might imagine it's going to be great. I mean, it's going to be,
Hey,
I can tell
Leafs
you.
versus Habs 9 times, Dave. Leafs versus Habs 9 times.
But then break it down to an individual standpoint. And now, what I really want to see is Shea Weber against Austin Matthews 9 times, and Morgan Riley playing against Nick Suzuki 9 times, or Brendan Gallagher going to the front of the net. That to me, is my old rivalries, with the Islanders when I started. It was the great Stanley Cup teams. It was Brian Trottier and Clark Gillies and Mike Bossy and Dennis Podvan, just Hall of Famers that I had to line up against every night. And it was phenomenal. And that's what I hope we get back to, because you talk about, so Columbus plays the Leafs last year in the playoffs for the first time, but they'd only seen each other 2 or 3 times during the regular season. They don't really know each other. And even, they have a good 5-game playoff series, but now because of the pandemic, you don't see each other again. And there's nothing that builds off of that. When you play a team 15 times, believe me, there's going to be things that build off it. You're going to learn to hate Brady Tkachuk to a whole new level. He's one of my favorite young players in the league. And I've done games between the benches, and it's comical to see him down at that level. Like, he's so involved in the game, and he brings everybody with him on both teams. And so, you're going to see unique things like that build up to a whole different level. However it moves forward, if it stays within the Canadian division, whether we do mini bubbles, however it configures, you're going to learn as a fan what the players learn. When you play a team that many times, it's really fun and really personal.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, as diehard Leaf fans over here, I was in Leaf pajamas before I was even born, it feels like, and my dad and I watch games like crazy for the Leafs, and it's going to be interesting. That Canadian bubble, like I said, I listen and I watch, you guys on TSN, I watch, the guys on Sportsnet as well, and everyone's loving this Canadian bubble idea, and I'm all for it as well. I can't wait for it. Speaking of, the changes, just to go back a little bit on the NCAA, just changes in hockey in general. You've obviously been in the NCAA for a very long time, playing and coaching. Have you seen any difference in the way the NCAA has developed players, or the way that game changed as well within the schools?
I think it was much perception as anything. When I went to college, it wasn't the fast route to the NHL by any means. And what changed that was the great 1980 U.S. Olympic team, which was an entirely, college-based team. And a lot of those guys went on to see stardom and superstardom in the National Hockey League. And so that was the start of it. And then over the years, I've always looked at it as a great alternate route, and just to look at your options. And so if you're a high-end, 14 or 15-year-old in the Toronto area, and I get asked the question all the time, is college for everyone? My first question is going to be, do you like school? And if the answer is no, it's not for you. You can't go to an elite university and if you don't like school, I mean, you're not going to survive. You're not going to exist. And you can't go to a great, NCAA hockey school if you're not willing to do the work academically. And some aren't, and that's fine. But it provides a great option to progress maybe at a little bit different pace. Practice to game ratio is very different. You don't play as many games. You practice much more. That suits some players for development. It doesn't suit others for development. So it's very individual, and it's not a uniform answer in what's best. It's what's best for the individual. And, when I went to college, I went with no thoughts of playing in the NHL. I went down to experience a great university and play the game that I loved and have it help to finance my education, which it did. I was on a scholarship when I went down, but it wasn't, I'm going down there as a direct route to the NHL. It simply wasn't. The NHL just happened. And, so many aged players are the best at a 14-year-old age or at a 15-year-old age or at a 16-year-old age that don't play out, and then you've got your late bloomers. Zach Hyman's a great example of a kid who, just developed late and later and stepped in and was ready to play in the NHL right when he got there as a 23 or 24-year-old. And that was more my route. And, once I got there, I wasn't giving up my job, and Zach Hyman hasn't given up his job, and he's not going to.
Absolutely. You touch upon development a little bit there, and that's exactly where I was leaning to next with the, the NHL draft and the players coming up out of the draft. Obviously the players that just were drafted a few months ago. I spoke to one of them, Cole Perfetti, who was just drafted by the Winnipeg Jets, 10th overall. Even though you were undrafted, but you're in the game and you cover everything and you've looked at it throughout the years, especially with TSN. Have you seen any changes of like the draft and how players are being developed with the new and next crop every single year coming out of the draft for the NHL?
Teams are putting much more into the development aspect of it, and all the way up and down. Development coaches. There are teams in the NHL that have a development coach for each position. And so they'll have a development coach, a left wing development coach, even if they don't have any current left wings that have been drafted. And they'll work with their AHL guys and they'll work with, and so that's how sophisticated it's got. And people realize now the importance of it. But I will tell you, back in, I think 86 was the first year the Flyers had a summer development camp, which was unheard of then, to bring your draft picks in. And the reason I remember it so clearly was they asked me to come in and speak to the draft picks and the players they had signed. And I remember walking in and there were, so there was the regular number of draft picks. Then they might have had 15 or 20 kids in the room when I walked in. And I laugh about it to this day because one kid stood out and it was an undrafted kid. And I remember thinking to myself after, who is that kid? And like, he carried himself with a confidence / arrogance that was staggering, and I'm like, is that our first round draft pick? And they were like, no, we didn't. He's just a free agent we signed out of the West. And it was Craig Berube. Oh. And I remember where he was standing in the room when I walked in. And so different teams handled it in different ways. That was way ahead of the curve to have a summer development camp back, in the mid 80s to try and prepare kids for what to expect. Because very often back then, their first training camp was a wasted adventure because they came in and their eyes were, so wide open, and they were there for 3 days and they were gone back to junior. So I think teams have gotten so much more sophisticated in handling the development aspect of it, and players' realization, things like off-ice training and the diet aspect of it and the sports science aspect of it, just light years ahead of where it was back then.
I want to touch upon the Leafs a little bit because you cover them a lot, obviously, with TSN and on the panel as well. And obviously from here, from Timmins, from Toronto, I guess you can say. They had a lot of pickups. They had a lot of pieces this offseason. Kyle Dubas went to work, as some Leaf fans would probably say, finally, in a way. But it's tough, right? The Leafs and the Toronto market, as we mentioned earlier, it's high pressure. It's, it's a bit intense. It's, the media demands kind of a certain standard, but the fans demand even more of a broader standard. They had pickups of like Joe Thornton and Wayne Simmons and Jimmy Vesey and so many other of these one-year contracts. What do you see about the Toronto Maple Leafs this upcoming season, or hopefully, let's say, a January 13th start date? What do you think they're going to look like, and how do you think they're going to do?
Well, they're going to be different. And they should be different because what they've done to this point hasn't worked to the best of their advantage. I mean, they haven't won a playoff series, and has to be the next target for sure. And, their high-end skill is well documented. It's so good. And, the salary cap issues have been well documented and well talked about and, well advertised, and that they've got a lot of their money tied up in a handful of players. And if those players aren't their best players every single night to a whole different level, it's not going to work. Now, what they've done is gone out and complimented those players. And, I had a great mentor when I was a young player, and that was Bobby Clarke. He was phenomenal to me. Will Joe Thornton be that to one of the young players? Will he provide, one player, just one player, and take him to the next level, be it Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner, or whomever it is? And, and then will he also perform as a player? Because you can't just be a voice in the locker room. That doesn't work. If you're just a voice in the locker room and you can't perform on the ice, then you're an assistant coach. You're not a player. And, I played late into my, 30s. I was technically 37 years old, my final year. You've got to be able to play. And so that'll be the question. And just how the pieces fit together. And, I think Lettinen is a big question on the defensive side. If he comes in and you're inserting a veteran in the lineup and not, an NHL rookie into the lineup, then so much better. TJ Brody, big adjustment coming back into his hometown area. And, and he'll realize that and understand that. But each individual piece is for a reason. And I like that, because they were missing some elements, I thought, going into the playoffs, for certain types of games. They were just missing elements that were necessary. Wayne Simmons will provide that element, and Joe Thornton will provide that element. And so I think Kyle Dubas has gone out and addressed what he felt were the pieces that he needed. And, he's done that, but he's also done it within a very, very tight budget, because that's what they have to work with. I mean, that's just the fact. When you're paying 4 players that percentage of the salary cap, you're going to be limited somewhere else.
You hear these names of the Toronto Maple Leafs now, and the likes of, yes, you got Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, Riley, but then you hear names like Joe Thornton, Jason Spezza, a few years ago, Patrick Marleau. Imagine if the Leafs had all these guys in their prime. They'd be winning cups left, right, and center.
It better be a league with no salary cap.
Yeah, exactly. And you see the NFL and the NBA just spending money on players. And I kind of like that the NHL doesn't have that, because there's no really super team, and there's no team. Yeah, let's have 12 All-Stars on one team, you know what I mean? Or 10 All-Stars on one team, which that would be, I guess, good for that team, but really not good for anyone else. Thoughts of, I wanted to ask this for you, because some Leaf fans always are skeptical with some decisions everyone makes. I mean, but that's just in general. You can't please everyone. You can't make everyone happy. That's for sure. And you know that probably firsthand. But in the likes of, some certain players, and one in like Martin Marincin on the blue line, people, are wondering, why do they always maybe play him, or why do they always pick him? Is it just because of the money and the salary to have a certain guy up instead of maybe a Rasmus Sandin or someone that has a larger salary cap, so then it's easier to go up and down from NHL to AHL?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions in one. Martin Marincin provides a safe outlet for them at a price they can afford. And, and the weight of it is, if you keep him up in the NHL and he plays 7 minutes a night, you're not hurting his development. Whereas with a Rasmus Sandin or a Timothy Liljegren, if he's going to play the role he ultimately will play in the NHL, then he may be better served to do it in the American Hockey League at 22 minutes a night or 23 minutes a night. And so it's all about the development of the individual. I mean, it really is. And, when you look at it, but it's funny you say that about Toronto, Nicholas. Every city that I go to is exactly the same in terms of how hard they are on their fans. I mean, I tell people when I played in Boston, if we lost to the Montreal Canadiens, I couldn't go pick up my dry cleaning.
Wow.
He wouldn't give it to me. I'd have to send my wife to go get my dry cleaning, because he'd be so mad at me because we lost to Montreal.
Oh my goodness.
So once again, I know you think that it's unique in Toronto and Leaf fans are so hard on certain players. Or in Philadelphia, we went through a stage where number 3, whoever was wearing it, would get booed off the ice and have to be traded. And it started before I arrived with Tom Bladen. It went through Ben Wilson. It went through Doug Crossman. It was crazy. And then we got a young player, Gord Murphy, who was a real good young player, and they gave him number 3. I said, why would you give him number 3? Like, don't use it, because the fans just don't like number 3. Doesn't matter who's wearing it. So
Absolutely.
every place has their unique fans, and their, so it's not just Toronto that's hard on an individual.
Yeah, and finally for the Maple Leafs, they have a good situation but a tough situation on the blue line. Obviously, picking up TJ Brody, signing him 4 years, Zach Bogosian, then you have Travis Dermott and Muzzin, Riley. There's going to be guys out of the lineup, Sandin, Lettinen. Is Zach Bogosian a guy which, for me, like as just an outsider, as a fan, I would have him in the lineup. Big body, can win puck battles in the corners, a little bit intimidating factor. I would have him in. Skill-wise, maybe not so great, right? Maybe like a Travis Dermott or a Lettinen. If we have to see what Lettinen's all about, and a Sandin. Is it going to be a tough decision? And will Zach Bogosian get the playing time that he may think he'll get on his one-year deal with Toronto?
He played a really important role in Tampa, but if you look at it, it was he and Luke Schenn and Eric Chernak and Jan Ruta who played the right side. And they all filled a really nice role for Tampa. But the two lefty they were playing with were Ryan McDonough and Victor Hedman. And then, of course, you had the young Sergachev as well on the left side. So you had the strength there. But how the pieces fit, I think Zach Bogosian will be a real nice complementary player. And I see him playing with a Morgan Riley. I mean, that's the way I see it, just as he complemented a Victor Hedman or, a Ryan McDonough. And I think he can play up in the lineup. And then how the pieces fit left, right, I think Lettinen is the big unknown here. It depends on how he comes in. Jake Muslin's going to be your third defenseman, essentially, your second left defenseman, and he's going to anchor that second pair. TJ Brody may fit there. So it depends on left, rights, and largely on what the most unknown of the group clearly is Lettinen. If Lettinen comes in and can play a top four role, then that changes your mix entirely. And it lets you just, progress with Sandin and Liljegren at the pace you want to, between the Marlies and the Leafs. And the other factor you have to factor in here somewhere, Nicholas, is we don't know exact roster size and we don't know compression of games. We don't know how those 56 games are going to fit into how many days, if that's how many they play, and, what it's going to look like. And so, it sounds like there's going to be an expanded roster of some sort, and we're not sure about the starting date for the American League either. So that's answering a question with more questions, and that's because there are more questions.
Hey, I love it. I love answering questions with questions. It's just what we do. But I guess it's just a simple yes or no, in your opinion. Are the Leafs a better team today?
I think they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are. Yeah. I think they are. It'll be up to them to go out and play, but I believe they are. I also believe that every team in the Canadian division is a better team than they were last year. And people will dispute that with Vancouver, but I think Holtby is a really quiet pickup for Vancouver, and lets Thatcher Demko grow. And those kids they have out there, specifically Hughes and Pedersen and Besser, those are young kids that are going to get better. And you can't tell, the world that your players are going to get better and everybody else's aren't. And, there's going to be an upside there. Calgary adds Tanev and Markstrom, and Montreal may have added the most out of anybody in Canada. I mean, Jake Allen's going to be a sneaky good backup to Carey Price. And then in the backside, adding Joel Edmondson, he's not fun to play against. And we know that Weber and Sherratt and Petrie aren't. And now you've added another piece to that. And, if their weakness was goal scoring, Tyler Toffoli is a pretty good goal scorer, and Josh Anderson's a real good player. So, I mean, everybody in Canada has gotten better. And Winnipeg is the one team that you would say, well, have they gotten better? Well, I think they're a really good team. They were thrown off last year by the fact they lost their 4 top defensemen. But they have 3 young guys coming as well that could be big factors and step right into the National Hockey League. One from the NCAAs and Dylan Sandberg, one from Europe and Ville Heinola, and then Sami Niku, who played in the American League for them. So I think everybody's better in Canada. So if you're the Leafs, you better say you're better, because everybody else has taken a step.
I'm sure Leaf fans are going to want to hear that the Toronto Maple Leafs are better this season. I can bet you on that, especially another season of going out early in the playoffs, just thinking numbers-wise. You stopped playing when I was born. Meanwhile, the last time the Leafs won the Stanley Cup was 1967. That's when my dad was born. Just insane to just think and process the numbers. Finally, within the NHL, Dave, this proposed January 13th start date, one of your colleagues at TSN, Pierre LeBrun, just tweeting out like crazy, and he always does well. And Darren Dreger as well, for your colleague. They always tweet out and keep everyone informed. Are you personally hearing the January 13th start date? What are the things that you're hearing? And are you, I guess, if you don't mind, if you can say your personal opinion, do you think there will be a season?
I do think there will be a season, and I think that date is fluid. I really do. I think if we're sitting here today and we're saying the 13th, that's the goal, that's what they're working toward, because you have to have something to work towards. If something from the outside gets involved, what I like, Nicholas, through this is, and I was working on March 12th, when the whole thing caved in. We did 6 hours live on TSN when the league was postponed at that point. And I said the one thing it could do is give the NHL and the NHLPA a chance to forge a whole different level of relationship. And it looks like that's what happened. And then if you go back 3 weeks ago, it looked like they were negotiating against each other again. And then all of a sudden, they weren't. All of a sudden, it was like, okay, it's we and the bad guys, the pandemic. And if we're going to negotiate, we're going to negotiate together, and we're going to negotiate against the pandemic and try and figure it out. That's the variable we don't control here. I think there's going to be a season. If it's not the 13th, then something from the outside, i.e. the pandemic, has caused that, and we have to work around it.
It's like the flip of the switch. what side are you on? And you just got to work hard and be patient, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's all we can do. It's out of everyone's control.
Finally, Dave, moving on to the World Juniors. You guys, TSN covers that a lot. Obviously, we've seen Canada go through a quarantine, and they're back training, back practicing now. How do you see the whole World Junior tournament panning out? If you want to give me your predictions on gold, silver, bronze, I'll take it. But for Canada's perspective as well, along with your predictions, how do you see Canada going? How do you see them doing? And what are you hearing, if anything?
Well, I think Canada's got to be, clearly one of the favorites, if not the favorite coming in, just on the strength of having the players they wouldn't normally have. Maybe a Kirby Doc wouldn't normally be available. Maybe a Bowen Byron wouldn't normally be available. Who knows if Cole Perfetti would have been available. And, if there were a regular NHL season. But the U.S. is going to be good. I mean, the U.S. is going to have a real powerhouse team coming out of that National Development Team program, the training program. The Swedes sound like they're being the most affected by COVID at this point, but we haven't heard a word about the Finns or anything that's going on there. And, that's a team that it's always impressive in this tournament. So, I don't know it to the level of what a Craig Button or a Ray Ferraro knows it, because I don't work at that level very often. I'll do the U18s in a normal year, or the U17s, but don't see those players as much as these guys do. So, I know Craig really thinks this is a strong Canadian team, and that they'll be the favorites going in, playing at home. And we've just got to get to the start line. I mean, that's what we've got to do. We've got to figure out how to get these players to the start line so the bubble can protect them, and then look forward to seeing some great hockey.
Absolutely. So no prediction for gold, silver, or bronze, eh? It's all good.
Nope.
It's all good. I can say I predict Canada. I'm Canadian. I have to. Absolutely. And finally, Dave, advice for, young broadcasters, advice for myself, went to school for it, starting up this podcast, getting on, getting yourself on the show, which I greatly appreciate, and so many former NHLers as well. What advice do you have from, for me and for all these other kids trying to come up? Obviously a player turned broadcaster, or player turned staff member turned broadcaster. What's your advice?
Nothing replaces hard work and preparation, Nicholas, in your job. I've worked with the best play-by-play guys in the sport, and, guys like Chris Cuthbert and Gord Miller, and I work, my regular partner, Brian Mudryk, is just tremendous. Wow. And he worked all the way up. I mean, he came all the way up. He came through curling. He came through minor hockey. He just ground his way up and kept going, and worked the world championships, and worked, he'd worked the offside of the tournaments, the international tournaments, where you didn't see him as much, but he is just a great play-by-play guy, and we've built a really nice relationship. But those guys work really, really hard, and they're the best, and their level of preparation is impeccable, and it doesn't matter what game it is. The gold medal game of the World Juniors is the same to them as a Tuesday night game between, the top team and the bottom team. It doesn't matter. They prepare the same way, and they treat each game like it's the game. And that's the key. And that's what they've passed on to me. And there's no such thing as, oh, this isn't as important a game. Every game that they do is the most important game, and that's what makes them the best.
I'll tell you one thing. That's exactly what I do. Every game for me is huge. I went to Brooks, Alberta with the Oakville Blades a couple of years ago, where I met Craig Button, actually. He was there because the finals of the National Junior Championship was on TSN. And I met him, obviously, in the Blades, came and finished in the semifinals. And it's exactly, for me, that level, or a regular season game against the Milton Menace, let's just say. I have all the same level throw, which that's one thing that's going for me. And I know hard work and dedication and passion, right? And then That's what I have. You just got to wait and look for your break, right? And that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I waited and I looked for my break in speaking with you. And I appreciate you coming on, Dave. I really do. Best of luck, obviously, continuing your broadcasting career and moving forward. But a lot of guys in your position, Dave, if I'm completely honest, sometimes don't give a guy like myself a chance coming up in the business who've been broadcasting, for over 6 years now. Former NHLer, TSN, on TV, like, yeah, who is this guy? You know what it is, but you came on, you messaged back, and I appreciate that more than you'll ever know. And I do appreciate you coming on my show.
Good luck with everything, Nicholas. It's been my pleasure, and keep working hard.
Absolutely. Everyone, that is Dave Poulin, TSN hockey TV analyst, as well as 13-year NHL career in the National Hockey League. Dave Poulin, everybody. I'm Nicholas Fiore, the broadcast voice of the Oakville Blades. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year as well. Enjoy the World Juniors also, because it's coming up. And stay safe. And mamma mia.
Now Davis takes it and looks to come the other way. Davis is in, trying to drive, and he will look to go across. Good play to Davis, though, to get it right back to him. He goes down low to Israels. Centering, it's there. Scores! Stevie! Steven Whittle scores his first OJHL playoff goal for the Oakville Blades. This game is opening up in a big way for both teams. Ricketts centering, what a pass, Israel's breakaway, the move, scores! What a goal for the Alaska Fairbanks commit, the assistant captain, Harrison Israels, with an absolute dandy. Down low to Lyons, Jack Lyons centering, scores! The double jacks combine as that puck popped up like a jack in a box, and it's Jack Ricketts from Jack Lyons. 6-1 on the 40th shot of the game. It's all Oakville.
Colette Smith hits it in. A chance here can develop, but the Blades will look to take it. And Ricketts finds Israels. Breakaway, Israels. A chance, backhand. Rebound. Scores! And the Oakville Blades win it here in Toronto. Blades win, Blades win, Blades win.
That was Mamma Mia. This is Fire Talk with Nicholas Fiore. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode.